what behavioral experts always tell us is that if we want to change deeply rooted habitual behavior, such as mobility behavior, we have to look at life-changing moments. And usually we then talk about getting married, changing jobs, having babies. But I think COVID-19 could be such a life-changing moment as well. During the lockdown, people were turning to other modes, sometimes for recreational purposes, just to remain physically active. But maybe that could be a trigger for them to think about cycling as a functional mode of transport as well. So if ever they are open and willing to change behavior, it might be now. And then, of course, we have to make sure it's in the right direction, not in terms of taking their cars. That's one thing. The second thing, I think, which could be a positive trigger, is the fact that we are in the middle of a huge street experiment. We are playing in a huge sandbox. So we have all these measures in place that people can try out in real life. They can experience what it feels like to have these new measures. They can experience that it makes the city better. And we know that if we want to win the hearts and minds of people, the best way to do that is by letting them experience something in real life. In Berlin, which really was one of the first to introduce and roll out these pop-up bike lanes. And what was really good as well is that they shared the manual in terms of how they did this, because there was no roadmap for this crisis. There was no recipe for this disaster. So also what we did within POLIS was really offer a platform for cities to talk to each other and learn from each other, you know, to have this peer-to-peer exchange, to learn from each other's solutions as well as mistakes in this unprecedented situation. And Paris, in that respect, has been inspiring many other cities as well. They really took this radical choice for a city of people, which they had already taken before, but now accelerated also this process and introduced measures which they were planning to introduce in the coming years anyway. And the interesting case about Paris is also that it includes the whole metropolitan area. There is also the region of Île-de-France, including Paris, which has been taking interesting measures as well. They have this very extensive bike network that is being rolled out and actually follows the same routes as the regional public transport network, the RER. So alongside that network, you now also have the alternative of bike routes to move around in the wider metropolitan area, which is very important, for example, for commuter traffic. And alongside that initiative, there's also an e-bike leasing scheme introduced by the region where citizens can lease an electric bike, which covers cycling also over a longer distance and which reduces the challenge of having to buy an e-bike, which is still quite expensive. So I think that's a very interesting example. If we look at those cities that are particularly doing well right now, is that they usually have very good sustainable urban mobility plans in place. And this is a tool that has been extensively and is being extensively promoted by the European Commission as well. It's an integrated long-term mobility vision where you look at different sectors, where you bring together different policy domains, where you start from your mobility challenges and try to address them through integrated packages of measures. So what often happened with these cities is that they fast-tracked the measures that were already planned. And this is, of course, increasing the likelihood of those measures to remain in place beyond the COVID-19 crisis, so to remain permanent. And what is also important in that respect and in that context is really to have this combination of carrots and sticks. The momentum is there, use it, use the triggers that I mentioned before and the higher likelihood of public support, and also dare to take measures which may be unpopular at first, but are needed for the good of society as a whole. And you always have this friction between what the individual citizen wants and what the city as a whole needs. But those cities dare to take measures which are also looking at the greater good and not necessarily only at the individual interests of people. When we talk about innovation, it's very important for cities to set the framework and to set the rules of the game, because innovation as such is useless if it doesn't serve a certain purpose, if it doesn't align with policy goals. If you don't set the right rules of the game as a city, those innovations might very well undermine the goals you have, or they might not deliver on the promises they make and rather create new problems or make the current problems bigger. For example, when it comes to automation, If we don't frame it properly, it might lead to more kilometers driven because people will be perceiving travel time in a different way as they can do other things. For electrification, it needs to be multimodal, or we will still have congestion, even if it's clean congestion. For micromobility, we have to regulate the use of urban space. We have to make sure that the modal shift is not from walking to micromobility, but it's from car use to micromobility, and so on. So in that sense, indeed, it's important to bring new skills to our cities. Because they need to be able to deal with these innovations, to understand these innovations, and as a result also frame these innovations. We will have to go through a phase where we train our officers or bring in new talent as well. And you see in America, there is a lot of change between people moving from the public to the private sector and the other way around, which we don't really see just yet in Europe, where once you are working for a city, you very often do it for the rest of your life. But I hope this dynamism and this exchange between the two sectors will also come our way as we see an ever-growing cooperation and integration between the public and private sector, especially in dealing with the mobility challenges.